Good evening and welcome everybody to the City of Lake Forest Park City Council Special Work Session for Thursday, October 3rd, 2024. And with that, I would entertain a motion for adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Been moved and seconded. Are there any comments or discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Ayes have it. I think Councilmember Bodie, are you with us? I can't see participants.
She raised her hand, so yes.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I was looking down at the bottom here, participants. Thank you, guys. Okay, tonight, council discussion topics. We're continuing with the discussion of the proposed 2025-2026 biennial budget, city council deliberations and recommendations.
Point of order, hands up.
Yes, Deputy Mayor Bodie.
I had to promote her.
Oh. Can you hear us? Oh, hello, Lori. Can you hear us okay?
Thank you. I could hear you before, but not speak or communicate. So Matt has taken care of me.
Yeah. Oh, there you are.
There you are.
Okay. Colleagues, comments, questions about the proposed budget? Director Bond, did you want to lead with something, or Administrator Hill? I think this is free.
We're here for.
Yeah, we're here
answer
at your
questions.
disposal, not literally.
No.
And
No disposing.
it's been a long year. But questions, comments, thoughts, for Tony.
I heard that there was an update on the figure that Councilmember Goldman cited about the dues that we pay to various organizations.
Oh, Director Bond, did you want to speak to that, or?
So we kind of have a team effort going on the dues of a group of us. Our community development director is doing a couple of them, and I will say that the King County Climate Cities that we said is K4C is not. It is the Housing Authority. So that I wrote that down. I'm like, I don't think that is correct, and I was correct in that it was not correct. So that needs to be updated and will be changed on the label. And then I don't know if did we get some answers for the Puget Sound Regional?
We didn't get a definitive answer, but the materials appear to indicate that if you're not a member, you're not eligible for regional transportation grants. What is missing from that is a definitive answer that outsiders, cities, or a lesser membership can still qualify some other way. They do it in an optimistic way. Benefit of membership is availability of regional grants. And Josh Brown hasn't returned a phone call as yet before tonight, but the answer to him would be, are there other methods to still remain eligible? And then the other one was K4C, which is entirely voluntary.
Yes, K4C.
County Cities Climate Collaboration.
Right. And I was able to speak to the manager of that program, and they did confirm the $700 a year figure for that.
If I wrote, by the way, our colleagues were on page 60 under executive,
Oh.
sorry, city memberships, just in case everybody wants to follow along or somebody's watching the video later, recording the video. And if I recall correctly, so then this number is here is the pass through for the King County
Regional Homelessness Authority, and that MOU is going to be coming to you again this fall. It was only for 2 years. It's expiring, so they'll be bringing that back to you. That's the pass through sales tax that we took advantage of directly to them for the severe weather shelter.
Yeah.
That's where it goes.
So just to clarify, so the bottom row, the name of the organization needs to change, but is that 35,000
Correct.
figure still
Yeah.
correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
The number is correct. The label is incorrect.
And we're still looking up Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. I believe that is a mandatory payment that we make. We'll double check that for you. Association of Washington Cities provide their retro insurance.
And our,
And our health insurance. So
Yeah.
we're a member of them for those reasons. So I don't think that one's going to change. Then you know the benefits of Sound Cities or such. And Seashore. National League of Cities is something that we just rejoined this last year.
Just a quick comment on PSRC. That is the organization through which an enormous amount of federal funds get distributed to various jurisdictions, both county and city. So I want to make sure that it's not, we have the opportunity through certain sources to certain paths to apply for federal funds, but PSRC is where a serious amount of money is funded through from the federal government. Deputy Mayor Bodie.
Yes, I just, thank you very much. So I appreciate the follow-up on this. I still think that some of these need additional follow-up. What I was suggesting at the last meeting is a proviso that indicated that, and I had flagged 3 of the pricey memberships here as something that we would fund if we ended up with additional general fund revenue, because these are coming out of the general fund, which is, more a definite hit to us. So those 3 that I had suggested that you followed up on were the last item, which is now the Regional Homelessness Authority. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that is not funded from the general fund. That is a.
Right, right. So exactly, I do remember that. Thank you. And then the Clean Air Agency, $30,000. So if we could still continue to follow up on that, and that would be helpful. And I still think Puget Sound Regional Council may have access to federal funds, but I don't think we've used them for access to federal funds. And I'm not saying don't fund them at all. I'm just saying, to me, it would be illustrative of telling the story that we're looking even in small places for belt tightening until the revenues come in. So that would be my thought, is to try. I realize these are not funds of significance, but they are symbolic of a close look at our expenditures.
Thank you, Lori. I apologize. Or you had a broader question?
I think I had a broader question, but again, I forgot it.
Okay.
I know,
We'll
I
come back
do
to you.
that.
And Councilmember Good.
that's what I was trying to
Yeah.
tell you.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
So, I think what I'd like to see is which of these are mandatory? Which of these do we have to pay into? And what memberships are providing the most benefit? Maybe there's a key of some sort, like M for mandatory, and if they do provide grant money, or if there's a way to get more money because we're a member, identify that so that it's clear for us. What I think.
Thank you. Alex, other comments, questions on point regarding city memberships? Okay. Moving on, broader questions or specific questions. I would just suggest in the issue of clarity, if you can point out the page that you're referring to, or we can help guide folks to where that resides section. Councilor Riddle. Remember it.
This is what, yes,
There
it
you
was
go.
a broader question, that's why I was holding back. An easy way for us to know what is in the mayor's budget and not, there's a lot of, especially some of the department presentations had their asks, but it wasn't clear which of their asks had been fulfilled and which were still pending, and we talked about it. So they told us, but it's like, it would be nice to have some place where we can see what changes
What
from,
was funded if that wasn't in the mayor's
Yeah.
budget. And
because
for
I'm still confused about the 2 police officers, and are they, what is one in, is 2, yeah, so. I just really would love to see something in writing, because I'm really big, it makes my head hurt.
So I am gonna I am gonna address that. So when we are talking about the additional police officers, where we are referring to their additional, yeah, sorry, page 85. We just had that conversation. I'm so- Apologies. So on page 85, the traffic safety fund, with the cameras that have been instated, that is driving an additional need for court clerks, for support on their end and the police officers. So that isn't an additional ask and demand off of what I'm gonna define as our true general fund. It's coming from the traffic safety, and one of them is an officer, and then one of them, I believe, is a support officer. And so this, again, is a educated guess at this point without true hard data. So a little bit more challenging to put this budget together. But it has to come from somewhere, start somewhere, and that's what a mid-buy is for, to true it up and see where that needs to happen. So when the only place that we're referring to adding additional court clerks and the police is stemming from this traffic safety fund that is going to be newly created this year in 2024, and we're working on finishing up a budget amendment and bringing forward an ordinance in order to create that fund, etc. It has to be done this year because we will be receiving funds, paying money out likely within 2024. And so that is the only place that we are referring to additional staff besides the 0.8 HR specialist. And that is currently included in the mayor's proposed budget. Now, let's go to another
Can I
page.
just add a
before-
comment?
I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Also on page 7, the mayor's letter includes the positions that you heard about, that they're not funded. So they're listed in bullet items.
Yeah.
On page 7, so.
Personnel requests with
Yeah.
Jill.
That one I caught, that was bulleted, that one I found right away.
Okay. Just wanna
So
make
I
sure
think
everybody knows.
what's making it difficult for me to tease this out is that there's no FTE change between bienniums. Because I think because we're going from a +3 to a +1 and then we're adding 2, see,
So I highlighted that this, I guess, was a choice.
on page, well,
47, page 47.
okay,
That is why they're highlighted, specifically the municipal court, even though there is not a change there. You'll see in the executive department, it goes from 2.5 to 3.3. That's adding the 0.8 HR specialist that was requested. And then the detail is a couple pages behind on that one. And then the municipal court, we can make that revision to add what they're asking for and increase it to a 0.2, or I'm sorry, increase 2.
I would almost recommend like another column of requests, because what
Yeah.
this identifies is the 8-year schedule of authorized positions, and these positions have not yet been authorized by council. So this,
yeah,
Lindsay just highlighted these to show you, these are the ones that would be affected.
Yeah.
So the 0.8 for the executive, the municipal court positions, and police, and then the public works.
but see, some of those are going up, did we already
Oh,
authorize?
No, none of these have been authorized, so it would be the stormware manager /
Yep, that would
NPDS and
be in
public works. You haven't authorized that, you haven't authorized the police officers with the new revenue, you haven't authorized the court clerks with the new revenue, nor the HR director support in the
so-
executive, so none of those have been authorized yet, that's why this doesn't reflect that, that's why she highlighted
Yeah.
to say, these are the ones that would be changed.
Correct.
Yeah.
I can see
so
the confusion.
4 of them are highlighted, but 2 of them are changed and 2 of them aren't.
Right, there's inconsistency.
It's
It's
inconsistent,
fair.
you've added the executive
Acknowledged.
position, but not the municipal
Oh.
court.
Yeah, you did.
You've added the public works, but not the police, so it's really, it was hard for me to determine what it was trying
I
to say.
think, no, if the public works one is seasonals. It's not the addition of the other
See?
one. So it's seasonals because now we've been hiring 4, which is that's a true It's true, yeah. So there's 4 seasonals, which equal 2 FTEs. So there are only 6 months, but that is a
Equivalent.
true FTE count. So that is,
That was previously authorized
yeah,
by council
Yeah.
action, so it's the executive one that's throwing.
But in public works, you only increased 1 FTE, but I agree you say 2.
correct. So there's 2, we've previously budgeted the seasonals as a 1 FTE. Might make more sense to walk to page,
So the increase is not 4, it's really 2,
yeah,
which
so,
translates to 1 FTE.
yeah, so if we, yes.
And it's a little confusing too. Remember that the 1 FTE moved to community development.
That's true too.
So that's, so. Yeah, we need an example. We need to
Yeah.
walk you through this.
We need to, yeah,
Data.
Yeah,
On point, like if you go to page 75. For the municipal court, it shows still 4.3, FTEs aren't changing, and then if you go to page 83 for the police. Again, it shows the FTEs aren't changing, and so. It feels like it's inconsistent that on one page it says municipal court is not changing. But then you go to a later page and it says, oh, but there's gonna be 2 more.
see, and
I know it's
I'm
gonna
gonna
have
have
a
to-
different fund.
I'm gonna have to think about how to display that accurately. Because it is inaccurate to state that it's being within the general fund.
But public works isn't, they're spread out on multiple funds,
That's correct.
so. What I'm saying is that it looks like these departmental lists aren't fund specific because of. Some of them are distributed on multiple funds, remember just general fund. So I don't know if it being in a different fund is as important as it being in the right department.
Perhaps maybe an org chart that before and after. That has the FTEs on it.
But I wanna see the numbers together too. How that affects,
I'm not,
both would be good, but.
Right. I'm not sure that that's gonna be possible, that's the problem.
Well,
Yeah.
if the budget already includes the funding for 2 additional police officers, then the police officers section should increase FTEs by 2.
Unless they're shifting compartments, right, this is.
So they're
Same
not,
department, different funding sources, but already we have people who are funded by multiple funding sources listed and.
But I think what we're saying is within the police department, we didn't put the salaries in there within. It's
Yeah.
just in this 002 fund because you haven't approved that. Those expenditures haven't been authorized into that department. That's why it just resides in this 002 fund on page 85 because we haven't authorized those. I can see that there's a little bit of confusion because 0.8 got there and we need to explain to you the dynamics of what you approved during this biennium with the public works, because you took the Corey's position and moved it into community development. So then that takes that out, but so then there are 2 added, it's the 4 part-times, which become 2 seasonals added in. So you only see an increase of 1 because we
but
took
it's-
1 out
it is
with
both.
the reorg, so we need to bring you a flow chart of
Yeah.
how this
Of
went
changes.
together, yeah.
And in the end, what is funded in the mayor's budget of those individuals, and then the bullet points at the beginning and the ones that aren't funded.
Yeah, so if you backed out the 0.8 out of executive on page 47, all those positions, everything that remains is currently funded. But it does not, this does not recognize the NPDES position, does not recognize the court's positions, and it does not recognize the PD positions.
I'm sorry, on page 47,
Yes,
but I guess you'd wanna have another column that says.
yeah, and that's what I said earlier. Yeah, I think if we added that, I think that would be helpful.
Because to Councilmember Riddle, it's good for us to understand where the people reside.
Mhm.
But it's also good to understand how those people are funded, because it makes a difference whether you're in a specific fund or a general fund.
Agreed. So I did misspeak. So if you go to page 49. The senior, the senior project manager, the NPDES, because that position is included in Public Works, and that budget was added into, and that is in the mayor's preliminary. So that is added, so now it's senior project manager, not just one, it's two. And then we increased the seasonal maintenance from 1 to 2. That being said, the position of the environmental sustainability specialist moved up under the community development. So there is technically 2 positions that were like added into the Public Works Department, which, so the seasonal workers only work for 6 months or less. So when we say 2 full FTEs, that just means 4 part-time people. It is 4 people, but if you just put it all together, it's 2 FTEs. And then the senior project manager is 2. And that's because that's what level we think that position will have to be. That's an appropriate pay scale in order to attract an individual that will be able to support the need of that. And so you have that detail on page 49. That being said, I think we're gonna have to, I'm gonna come up with I'll come up with a different way. Maybe it's in the positions column. And then I'm gonna have to, maybe we'll talk, maybe Phil and I will just offline talk this through of how and maybe we do an FTE count and we throw it into the, not throw it, but place it into the, let's be a little kinder than that. The traffic safety fund, and show that it's 2 FTEs for police and for court. And because that is where they're being funded from. But on the actual preliminary budgeted position schedule, it will then just increase, like the police department, the support officer will become 2, and we will just add an additional regular police officer. So that count will go up and it'll show right there. And then it'll be the same for the judicial, the court clerks, that FTE count will just go up within this budgeted salary schedule. We'll keep that same, but then show the FTEs in the appropriate fund being 002. Does that sound like a reasonable?
That's sort of a tangent.
Yeah, if can you put the fund numbers in here if it's coming out of a single fund?
So
I kind of know, like 002, I think we all know we've been talking about it being the new one, but
I'm not sure what exactly is intended by that. The only department that isn't being funded that has a different allocation is Public Works until the end of the year, and that ties out to our cost allocation policy.
so all the rest of the operations budgets are all general fund?
Yeah.
There's no,
They're like police
Yes.
100% general
Yes.
fund. They have no other. I'm probably 95% general fund with 5%. I don't know where that is. The current policy is that it's like there's not a straight percentage that we allocate every year. It's allocated at the end of the year through a policy that's been previously adopted by council, however long ago that was.
Yeah, and trust me,
And we've had discussions
when I
that
have
it's not
time,
the best.
it's on the list.
It's something that we
It's
think
pretty good.
should be a percentage allocation. It should be, you go through, you identify what people do, you evaluate this on a biennial basis of the work that's getting completed, come up with a percentage, so then you know what percentage is coming out of each fund. It's not. the
That's how
best.
I've done it previously at every other city that I've ever worked at. That being said, our cost allocation policy states to be doing it a certain way, which is what we are following, which is a true up at the end of a fiscal year. And it's based off of a transaction count, so you have to wait until your open period is closed. And so there's a hybrid way of doing it through the policy. It's a transaction count, and then it's an FTE for joint services such as IT, human resources are the two, and I am missing one. I think it's payroll. That's the third position identified as truly should be shared resources. And so it doesn't fully cost allocate all positions, just a handful.
Another FTE confusion on page 47, police is 23. On page 49, police is 23.35. And I'm guessing the discrepancy is the domestic violence advocate, but it's not clear why on pages 47 and 49, they're in different departments.
Cause it's, because it was technically that position is being paid from community services, even though the FTE is under the police umbrella. So it's being paid for out of, basically where we pay Corey, so 500, Department 500. It's a community service that we are providing, so it's been allocated to that portion of the general fund. That being said, that person reports to the the police department approves their time.
I mean, it's still confusing though, if on like 2 consecutive pages, they're in different departments. So like, is the table on page 47 and the table on page 49, are they different organizationally? And if so, I think that could be more clear.
It used to be the other way around, and that was confusing, and so we split it out and we put it under the police, so we can switch it back. We can pull that 0.35 out for the domestic violence and put her, that position under the community services as it's allocated into.
I would say, as long, I'm ambivalent on which way you do it, as long as it's consistent throughout.
I would honestly take it out of community services. There are a lot of positions that are in a department that's funded by someplace else. And so
It seems to be.
I would think-
supervises.
I would think it belongs in the police department. Even though it's being paid for by a 500 fund. I think that's where.
Department 500.
Department.
Just, well, that just,
Yes. 500, 501, 502. Gotcha.
thank you.
I think that the question is because we're either adding or subtracting people to a department, I believe. So wouldn't it might be helpful to have, what do we have this year? This is what the ask is. These departments either are and have how many employees are in a department, that's a number, and then how many are being asked. And then you can see what was there for 2024 or 2024, what do you want for 2025? So
Yeah.
you can automatically see that there's a difference in an addition or a reduction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll add the proposed column and we'll true it up, and we can move we can move the domestic violence advocate under the police, and we can just move it around to where they're being paid from. Well, we'll have to make that change in the budget.
Yeah, I mean,
Because that's the bottom line is what funding more people, right? Isn't that what the whole?
yeah, and where the funding's coming from.
Right. So with these reduction, with people moving through departments, it doesn't really give you an idea who is honestly, how many headcount are being added.
So what I'm hearing people summarizing it here a little bit. So in the departments, what is not included, what is included, kind of, and then a delineation of what the changes are and clarity on where the funds, where the position is being paid from, regardless of the oversight.
Yes.
I think that's easy,
Very
because we know HR is a cost allocation, just like Shannon's position. And PDS was proposed in the mayor's budget, 100% from a rate increase. And then the 2 in courts and the 2 in police are funded, proposed to be funded to 100% out of the 002.
That could be a footnote
Yep,
to,
we can do
the
that.
extra,
That's easy.
whatever it is. that you do.
Okay, great. Love clarity. Perfect. Any other comments on this topic, questions? Maybe we've captured all that,
Yeah.
For pointing personnel.
and the good news is, this is so big, I can read it from, it's the smallest table in the book. I'm just trying to think. Colleagues, what other topics would you like to discuss? Section, Councilmember Freeland.
So I just submitted to the leadership team the budget proviso language for the climate manager position. So hopefully that will show up someday. But I do want to make a comment about this, which is in our governance manual and in these meetings, I've not heard a way in which there's like a template for this sort of thing. So I just made something up. I just stole it from the Washington State Legislature.
Sure.
So I think it would behoove us if we're gonna, because this is not the only proviso that's gonna be in the budget. It would be good to have like a template for that sort of thing.
So where, oh, I'm sorry, can I, were you finished?
Yeah, I'm done.
Are you gonna jump in?
No.
Or, okay, so typically what's happened in the past with provisos is we add them in as an exhibit to our actual budget ordinance that is adopted. And so you're gonna have your standard ordinance with all of your funds and your revenues, your expenditures. Then you're gonna have exhibit A, which is your adopted salary positions, budgeted positions, and your salary schedule. And then exhibit B becomes the proviso. And that's baked right into the actual budget ordinance that is adopted. And that's how we've addressed provisos in the past. Which my anticipation would be that we would just continue that practice moving forward. As an exhibit B in the main budget ordinance, so it's just tied right to it.
So I had a chance to look at yours just briefly before I came downstairs, and I think the one benefit of the way he's done it, following what the state's doing, to give some triggers of when council would authorize it. We've in the past had it was more verbal, so he's captured the document, so I think it very well.
Right, so for instance, and I appreciate your comments, Director Vaughn, because I was able to find exhibit B for, I think it was the 2017-18 budget. And it was literally exhibit B, the name of the position and the amount of funding and virtually nothing else. So, you know, it's, as Administrator Hill said, it's nice to have the triggers and even the justification for why we're doing it this way. Trying to be a little bit more transparent.
Staff is always willing to help with proviso writing because it is challenging. I would just say, Paulus, did you want us to talk just sort of briefly about what the path would be for what you're describing, Mr. Tony? Because I don't believe we talked about that. We talked about it at the CAC on, it's been many meetings this week.
2 days ago.
Tuesday.
Thank you. I'm just gonna throw it, last Friday, I don't know, losing track. So what would happen would be if the council chose to move forward with this, it would have to be, we all, first of all, have to check with Republic Services, which Mr. Hill is working on right now to find out whether it falls within what's allowable, the parameters. It can interrupt me at any time, Phil, on this, if I get something incorrect. Within the allowable franchise agreement and sort of the changes that happen.
Yeah, so it's allowed.
Okay,
It has nothing to do with the agreement that we have with them. The only place that it comes into the agreement is if we put a tax in place that causes administrative costs above $5,000, and we have to negotiate with them on what their rate would be to capture those dollars back within $5,000. I had Attorney Pratt look at this. So the recommendations would be, I've just got the rest of the numbers from Republic today. So now we can calculate their total gross revenue and what percentage of a utility tax on solid waste you would need to generate that revenue to pay for a position. And then council can have the discussion on what funding level you want to put in place for that. And this is one of those utility taxes that has no cap for state law. So our neighbor to the east charges 10%. I just offer residential, that would be be way more than we need for a position, so. I'd hate to get up to double-digit percents. I don't think that's a good place to be. The rest of our utility taxes are at 6%, and also because they're capped at that. But like you've been have a discussion of what you think is appropriate. So we're working on that. Once we get the numbers run, then I'll reach out to Republic and start that conversation.
It's verbal.
Yeah, it's exciting to hear. Do we think we can get this for January 1?
No, it won't be ready for January 1. Just because once we get this adopted, once council votes on it, and Republic will have a little bit of lead time, but we're only a month or so from council adopting the budget. We'll have to do that negotiation with them. And see, we'll send that off as a DOR that goes to, and their timing of getting that in place and beginning to collect, is it gonna be in January? Dollars flowing into the city.
Their estimate, are we talking like April 1, July
It
1?
was different.
It
It was different with all the ones we did last time.
want to say that it was 4 months on one and 6 months. I think it was like April 18th, we started collecting on one of them, and then it was 6 months before we collected on the other one. So I think it's gonna take some time. It's, even if we implemented everything in order to make it happen, I wouldn't be comfortable stating that we could do anything prior to 6 months, unfortunately.
I think the important part is the nuts and bolts of this are, one, determining what the parameters are relative to Republic Service, or the limitations relative to Public Services. Two, adding provisos to the budget if you choose to do that. And then three, there's going to have to be enacting legislation to pass the tax. So the council can certainly do its work
Yes.
within a period of time. Once we have the information, I don't think it'll take super long to get that information. It's just a question of when the actual tax will be able to take effect and start being generated. And then I would assume that there would be a period of time written into the proviso that was, and again, this is up to you all, but this is the direction I think we would assume it would go. There'd be a period of time in the proviso saying that after a certain number of months of collecting this revenue, then the position would be advertised and filled as quickly as possible.
So as we talk about that position, is there examples of what that position would actually entail? I mean, if it's just public education, I'm not sure that's the best value.
Yeah, so Shannon is working on that right now, reaching out to the surrounding cities. There's a little bit of a job description included in the climate action plan, and then she's looking Shoreline, Kenmore, and I think it's Bothell, all have that position. So taking a look, Shorelines is, I don't think a good match for us because it's 2 positions. It has kind of a supervisor, somebody else under it. This would be more of that boots on the ground, going after grants, community education, etc. Would be under Mark. But we haven't got to the point yet of identifying exactly the duties of that position. But I think a good spring is a climate action plan because it identifies some things they thought were important.
That's what we're working on. And to add on to what Administrator Hill said, it's also to essentially make sure, assess, and that we comply with the King County greenhouse gas reduction targets that have been set. So education outreach is an aspect of that, but it's not the whole thing.
Where would that money, what fund would that money go into?
It would have to be general fund.
It would have to be general.
And actually, oh, sorry.
No.
My apologies. Go ahead.
This is the Seattle nice thing.
Yeah.
It's just
We love
thinking
where we
it's
stop,
the
don't we?
utility tax,
Yeah.
so I think this is more coordination with Republic and what is negotiated as far as when we can implement collection and then remittance back to us.
Do they collect it?
Yeah, so if it would be off of, that would be correct, yeah, so it's not a remittance to DOR, it's not a remittance to any other entity, it's actually a negotiation, which that could take, I'm
Timing.
sorry, this is just coming full circle.
Only ask for the information at this point, but I haven't told them what we're up to.
So this might actually, that's what I'm thinking, so we would be, the money would be remitted to the city. from them.
So would
So,
that need to go into something like an enterprise fund or something weird like
No,
that, or
it
does
was
it
in-
still stay going?
no,
into-
it still would be
the
general
general
fund,
fund,
it would be equivalent to like our surface water and our utility tax. When we implemented those, they were effective on 1/1 of 20, was it 3 that we did that, 23? So then immediately on that, the, you know, the second that that date transpired and showed up, that we were able to start collecting that 6% tax to follow the ordinance that was adopted. This one could get a little, I just want to be careful, so it could be a little bit trickier on how we negotiate. Because we don't hold that utility, so it just could be just more coordination, it
Yeah.
might be a
Yeah, 'cause I was
quarterly
thinking-
remittance, I think there's details, I'm just. Talking very, once I just realized all that in my,
Yeah, I was trying to figure, is it like the sewer utility where then the money
will
is
be.
transferred into,
Well,
but they're the utility and it goes
that's the bigger challenge right there,
into our general fund, okay,
is that we won't be,
we'll figure it out if
Yeah.
we wanna go there. Yeah.
Well, yeah, what I would suggest is maybe, I can get together with Phil and I can get together with council leadership, we can come up with a little flow chart. And sort of next steps and paths, it's very simple, just so we have a visual to take a look at on where we need to be. And then sort of, and we can come up with a rough timeline, hopefully, see next meeting is the 10th, I believe. So, we'll see how that shapes up, it may be a little longer than that, depending on how responsive Republicans. Is that reasonable, Mr. Hill?
Yeah, I mean, my next single, but it sounds like there's pretty good consensus, is contact Republican. D. Weicker over there and just say, hey, this is what we're thinking, I'll sit down and talk to you.
Great.
We don't know what the rate will be, they don't care what the rate will be, they
Right, the
itemize
impact
it
on
on their
their-
bill so
their
that they can say, oh, that's, go yell at them, they'll yell at us. It's the same with any utility, they will itemize it out, so.
Any other questions about the climate action manager? So council leadership will work on the proviso with the assistance of staff. And you guys will have the information you need to consider what path you want to take. That's
More
Republican.
broadly, is it possible that we could have like a visual summary for next week of all the provisos, what their triggers are? That's because there's the climate manager proviso, there's the court clerk proviso, there's the police support officer proviso. Are there any other provisos that we talked about?
Yeah, currently,
Are
unless
the-
you.
are the positions provisos, the court and
I
the,
thought they were provisos like based on the number of citations issued by the cameras.
Yeah, the courts was, the police was immediate upon, and you would have to determine a revenue stream. So the police were just hired them both. The courts had their one position that they wanted immediately. And then the next two coming were based off of counts. And we didn't provide that. No,
we did, I don't believe so.
Keep in mind, again, to all of your questions about funding source. In the budget, we have baked in a certain amount of revenue from the new traffic camera installations to pay for those positions, so.
The new cameras are all going into
they all go into O2, they have to.
existing cameras that can go into general fund are accounted for.
They stay in the
And
general
then-
fund.
Exactly.
Yeah, the revenue you
Those are
see in the
clear.
general fund, in the 001, those are the original cameras, this 002 on page 85, new cameras. But this is anticipated, well, that's not the revenue there, but anticipated revenue, it's just
Yeah,
that
which
as
are
an
very
estimate.
conservative about it. And it's a great point, because we're able to keep in mind too, under state statute. We're allowed the increase of one additional red light camera and one additional school zone camera, and that can still be attributed directly to general fund. Future installations are already expected to go with the new state statute rule.
Okay.
And for clarification, one means one camera, not,
One, not a set.
not a set,
Mhm.
that's, yeah, so.
But I mean, by the side.
So like at a red light camera, like if you were to do red light cameras at 35th and 104. You'd have two cameras for each direction, only one of those can go into the general fund, the other one would go into O2.
Which is. That's
That's-
an issue with that. Let's do
Which
that.
other?
Yeah.
Well, the other one is school zone camera. I don't know, like, yeah.
So we'll have we'll have traffic safety updates here coming up about cameras in future weeks. So Mr. Golden, you're looking thoughtful.
Yeah, so kind of, so then I guess the two provisos that we are active now are climate manager and court clerks. Are there any other provisos that council members have been thinking? Like I see GIS manager is funded. Is that something there'd be interest in making that a proviso? I'm trying to get a feel for accounting provisos we might have.
I have not heard any discussion about the addition of a GIS manager as a base because there has not been an identified revenue stream. And keep in mind too, that next year we'll be in the mid-buy situation. There's options to reassess where we are because we have a lot of learning to do with a lot of changes coming at us.
I think the one thing that that may have been brought up about the GIS managers. What offset to our current consultant amount of work would be taken over internally if we were to do that, and what would that transfer of funds be? And it may not be very much, I don't know, I just don't know how much Transpo's doing in that arena.
They've done a lot recently for us with the map that we presented, and there's some additional data that they would have, but it's been very intermittent. This position was proposed to address all the things we don't do, like we have a lot of data that's been collected by interns over time that's out there, but it's not housed in one map, you know. Where's our sewer, where are our inverts, where, you know, where's our stormwater lines, et cetera, the age and the
Amber and all.
well, yeah, and what state are they in at this point in time? Kind of the information we've collected on streets recently. And so it's kind of a body of work we haven't done to point. So I wouldn't say that there'd be a huge cost savings.
Primarily full out.
So on point, I was looking through the city's site for where the water districts were. And the image that we have up on the site right now is a static image. It looks like a typewritten map from something like 1980 or so. So yeah, it would certainly make that kind of thing a little bit more accessible. Yeah.
And there's certainly a lot of stuff you can do with GIS, even in larger cities. You get into the point where everything goes into it, all your building permits, all your planning permits, everything. It's a repository, so somebody can go and click on their parcel because it's housed, in the cloud city base. You can click on it and see what permits have been pulled over time, what code enforcement actions been against it, on and on. There's a lot you can do, but that's very expensive, very time consuming, and that's more than a GIS person wants. Yeah.
Seattle GIS located all of their street trees and allocated it to a particular department that planted it, or whether it's a public or with the owner, and then its diameter, and its type, and its condition. I mean, it's extreme what you can do with GIS. Kind of cool.
Yeah, it is. And on point, I would say that this is part of the sort of the democratization of government. GIS managers have been, and technicians have been something that is really important, being able to bring the data into one central repository. My fervent hope is in the future, we're going to be able to do that, because I really think that the community is looking for it. It's just, of course, the question of where to fund it. And so this is a conversation certainly that next fall we can have a much deeper conversation about. And also, if there's ways that we can find to fund it in the short term through this budget process, by all means, everything's on the table. So, because I think everybody believes it, it's just a question of how we get there.
So one of the things that we brought up was a grant writer. Whether it's part-time or whatnot, so we'd like us to continue to think about that. The goal is that that person has a net value of generating grants, bring into the city. Recognizing that that may not be, it takes.
And my thought after we had that discussion the other night would be to get on the MRSC roster and put out an RFQ and see what that looks like as far as cost. Are there retainers necessary on all of that? That's a future.
Sure. Deputy Mayor Bodie.
Yes, thank you very much. I was following up on and thinking about the GIS issue and how what a good job Transpo has done on the transportation map. And I wonder, I know we have stormwater consultants right now, and they've collected all this data and inventoried our stormwater regulation points. And I wonder whether within the scope of the current contract, we could ask them to put that data in a GIS format that is compatible. So it's nothing to do with this budget. It's just, is there an efficiency there that we could go for with our existing contract? Because it's a great way of organizing the data they've been pulling together for us. So what you were saying, Phil, just triggered my thoughts in terms of maybe at least there are components where we could use our existing resources to do more than we have in hand.
Yeah, no, I agree. We've got a lot of data.
Yeah.
Just getting it to somebody to have them populate them out.
Yeah, anyway, it's just I'm sorry to get us off the topic of the grant
No.
writer. So
Thank you.
go for it.
Alex, so we were talking about proviso list. We can, a lot of this is really,
I would say to provisos as well, anything the council through this process determines is gonna come out of the budget. Then that would be going on your proviso. So if you decided that in PDES, you didn't want to take on that 10%, we're still working on some funding options for you. Councilmember Goldman had asked, if we don't do this and we do that, how is this paid for? And so we're working through that. But if ultimately there's something in here that you want to pull out, I recommend that we figure out, is that something that's proviso, and what would be the trigger for going back in the budget? And that's the only thing I can think of right off the top of my head. But
that's a great idea.
I'm not asking you to do that by any stretch, but just an example.
I love that idea, actually. That's a bit of real.
And I did mention space capacity restraints. So the more staff that we find budget for, the less space we have. So I don't know if that's something that you're able to kind of get your head wrapped around what might be able to go to another space. And I mean, not a very thorough review, but obviously.
I think what has been asked for the positions in PD and courts, they have an idea of how they would make that work. As far as like a NPDES position, we've got it on the desk right now. So I think, but there is a future problem of if there are new revenues, if the city council wishes to add a GIS position and other positions and we add a bunch of more cameras, how are we going to do that? Are we going to get to the point where we can talk to the guild about citizen reviewers instead of them having to be police officers or, at least a support officer, or they could do it from home 100%. So, I mean, those are discussions. But right now, I don't think we're worried about space at this point in time. If we add a climate manager or whatever we end up calling it, or we'll have to figure that out. Senior planners area is big. Is there room for two? I don't know. Do we do, is it a full-time position? Part-time? Can we do the hotel idea I talked about the other night?
Yeah.
So I think we have a little bit of flexibility,
Yeah.
but it's not gonna last long.
Yeah, excellent. There's a limit, and then also just, the work environment, we want to make sure that we are retaining our skilled staff
Mhm.
and that they aren't leaving because they're shoulder to shoulder with somebody, you know what I mean?
Yep.
There's always a balance we have to.
Mayor's office is huge.
It is oversized.
Yeah, it's either freezing cold or a sauna like today. Oh, what would you say?
Well, I have one question. We're not funding the youth care. Are they not renting the space anymore?
As far as I know, they're still in there.
Are we not contributing?
Paige?
They never came to us, they never came back to us for a renewal today.
I'm
I am-
getting there.
I haven't heard from.
71.
71.
Yeah.
Because I would, if they just didn't think about it, I don't know.
That's the co-funding rent, right?
Yeah, I don't think they're,
Yeah,
I don't
I
think
still
they're there
think, yeah.
anymore.
They might be gone. There's been,
I don't know.
oh, because there's the new cleanup place
cleanup,
over there. They might,
It
It might have moved on.
I haven't seen their
Remediation.
signage now that you said that.
Yeah, I,
We'll have to follow up and see what's going on there.
Mark
They
Phillips
certainly
may
didn't
have
come
it.
and request money,
Yeah,
so.
and then. I know some of these items, I mean, this is just the way we've been calling it, but it's hard for me to keep track of which ones belong where. And which ones are outside entities, which ones are internal. If there's a way of. Just putting a, you know, cause we say,
yeah,
like,
that's,
historical society, well, that's the.
you're bringing up another great point that, that we did, that the city in the mayor's preliminary budget, that additional funds are being allocated to community
Yes.
partners.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and I was actually, you know, that was in your, one of the presentations, right? But then I was like, okay, now which of these line items is which?
So do you want me to do a quick rundown again?
I just want it written, so when I'm, this 10:30 at night, I'm looking at this, I can remember.
The numbers that are showing there is the delta, so the senior center asked for an additional 10,000 per year. The drug and alcohol prevention, that's the Center for Human Services. And they came,
Yeah,
So maybe like if there's a way you could take that first column and just make it a little bit more descriptive.
Like the actual name of. the
yeah, like the
Exactly.
actual name of the entity, so when
Yeah.
we're talking deliberations, we call it Center for, you know,
Is
Center
that
for
a
Human
bars,
Services.
is that a bars issue?
I'll just do it.
Like for like,
No, I just meant the drug and alcohol prevention. Is that
Yeah,
a bars
it's-
issue?
it-
So we've got to put something, that's got to be there.
This
too.
is the, if this description and we want it to, it does need to be drug and, but that's behind the scenes as far as like in my financial system. As far as just being transparent and forward facing for the council community and transparency, I'm happy to change it to Center for Human Services.
Yeah,
or the value of a colon, like, because later on, like you say opioid prevention, Hope Street. So there needs to be a legal description and then the colloquial name for what it is.
We can do that too.
yes, community has no idea.
And two, I would add, if I may, that the revenue source, because that one, for example, comes straight through the opioid settlement. So it's
Correct.
passed through.
That's, yeah,
Like, for instance, senior services, just making that senior services Shoreline Senior Center.
and then. The middle and after school. Program. That was the YMCA, then they weren't doing, what's the status of that program again?
Was that run by now?
I'm
I'm
just-
drawing a blank.
No, it's Shore, isn't it Shore, no, is that separate? Shorelines? Is it Shoreline, not school district?
I can't
drawing a
remember.
bit-
It was picked up after YMCA dumped it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
I forget the entity.
So again, kind of nice to know who's getting the money.
So this is the middle after,
This is the middle
Yeah,
after school
okay.
program. It was
Previously,
the-
hang-
the
yeah.
YMCA hang time is what it was.
Right.
and Now it's a new
Right.
Yeah, let me try.
I know what that's
new
called.
place.
That was 2 years ago.
I.
I know a former council member we could call and find out. She's a huge volunteer there.
On point, so what is the King County Alcohol Program?
that is not optional in order to pay. That is something that the city is, we have to pay into that program. It's not really an optional line item.
Everyone pays a.
It's,
into it.
yeah,
I
it's,
think
yeah,
it's
so it-
education
it's,
and
I think that's, I'd have to double check, but it's when we receive a portion of the like liquor taxes. This is our portion back that we pay to King County, so it's, we get a quarterly invoice and we pay that back to King County on a quarterly basis. So it's something that's not really optional.
And just as for your edification, when I had conversations with staff about funding these programs. One of the things that was raised, which is an excellent point, is there's an option for you to do provisos for the funding, saying this is conditional upon certain milestones, et cetera, et cetera. And I, rather than our team trying to, second guess. I don't mean that in a positive way, but trying to formulate what your expectations are or milestones. Thought it was best to just leave it to the group and see what would make some sense. So that is optional. Okay, anything else to move on from community services and see if there are any other places that folks would like to talk to?
Actually, one other thing on community services, I noticed that the Climate Action Committee is completely defunded. And I'm wondering, given that we're not, if we proceed with our, what seems to be coming together as a plan of the climate manager, if they're not going to be hired for at least half a year, would it be reasonable to fund them to a much smaller amount, like say $1,000, $2,000 range?
So we had talked about this previously. If they have any needs of professional services, that would just be handled through Mark's department.
Existing
Corey's
salaries.
Corey's got professional services that she can tap for that if they need to produce something or buy something for an event. That's how we usually do this, how we do it with the tree board, et cetera.
Look at it. Good question. Thank you. Colleagues, other questions about community services?
Hey, to your, thanks to Matt, YMCA question, hang time, City of Shoreline took that over and we're remitting
City of
something to
Shoreline.
them. So you were right, going down to the shoreline, you're like, some shoreline.
Something
The city.
line.
I was like, no, not the school district, but I was like, shoreline. I'm
Yeah,
like, I
the
can see the
city.
invoice.
They
but
took it
Wasn't
over,
getting
yeah.
city of.
They have a
Yeah.
position over there that manages that.
Thank you, Matt.
Position for everything. And it reminded me, I didn't say this earlier, so to Director Vaughn's comment about where the allocation of the cost allocation for somebody's salary, where it's distributed across multiple departments. This kind of highlights the fact that we're a very, very small community, and so people are wearing lots of hats basically, as opposed to other communities that can afford to have a dedicated person, one funding source, or more than one dedicated person. Okay, moving on from community services, other questions we'd like to discuss?
So page 65, municipal services department. One thing is that there may be a spelling error, or there's a new word I don't know about, but the coatage and equipment sales tax. I'm not trying to hear it. I was like,
Postage.
I know
Yeah.
it's posted.
I don't know, that just reminded me of the.
The A and the S are right next to each other.
They are right
Reminds me
next
of
to
the
each other.
priest and the princess bride,
Uh,
love and marriage. Cottage, yes.
And then the laser fiche, we talked about that. Is that cost? How's that cost distributed in the budget that we're looking at?
Currently in the courts department, because they were because they were the ones to first ask for it, and although it's being stated that the entire city can be supported by that, they were the first ones to ask for it. It currently was budgeted in the 23-24. They just, that department hasn't been able to get to it due to demands of the year. So that's where we left it. We took it out of municipal services because we did not want to double account for it. Just leave it in one spot and then have, that way a mistake didn't occur. And then they also are paying for the maintenance in the following year. We had a brief conversation about that, that's probably more appropriately, if it does end up being an entire citywide, that's probably more appropriately to hit a 502 and be an actual interfund service as an ongoing maintenance item.
Okay.
Once
for
it,
everyone
once we walk, yes, once that walks into being a true citywide and not just a general fund for municipal services. So I'm not exactly sure what that timeline might look like. That being said, that the original ask came from court. That's why we've elected to keep it in court and have it just walk through there.
So it's less than the 23-24, or is that? So yeah, so we had Laserfish on one of these line items, and I think it wasn't supposed to be there anymore.
You mean the one about,
Professional services, security, Loomis,
yeah.
Laserfish, I think that got pulled out of that line item, where does it exist now?
So, no, I think that is the laser.
But there's also machinery and equipment of $41,000, I'm not sure what that would be in a court.
I think that's what, in a previous meeting, you had said that the machinery and equipment is the Laserfish modernization.
Matt, you were in on that meeting that they had right before they finalized this. Do you remember the dollar amount off the top of your head?
Laser fees, it's 24,000 for the first year. Then 12,000, for the second year for service.
I'd have to go back and look at the details. I'm just gonna have to put a pause on that and circle back with you on the machinery and equipment. Because I actually do think there's a component of that for,
That's 36,000 right there. That's for the biennium, and they had talked about the need for some scanners.
scan,
And so I think
that's what I
there's
was
some
just gonna
additional
bring up.
costs.
They had some scanners, they had some equipment.
So
And
that
then-
would be the 41,000. So it's the first year plus the second year's maintenance plus some equipment they need to
Miscellaneous.
support it.
That's what referred to.
thanks, and on the matter of the Laserfish, is that a brand name or is it just a generic name? for
It's a
technology? It is.
It used to be microfiche.
Okay, so.
What
I remember-
Go way back.
I remember those. Those are
You remember
great.
those, you know, moving around.
Yeah, and you can never find anything because it moved too fast. Yeah,
Yep.
well, the thing that occurs to me is that I've seen Laserfish called out as a line item in previous budgets, so why are we paying the first year's thing? The.
So it
It
was,
hasn't been.
it wasn't implemented in the
Yeah.
23,
Okay.
24.
Never
There
got
were-
to it.
Can's been kicked down the road.
Yeah,
Okay.
there were some staffing changes. There was also some questions about, can't remember the system that state courts was going to go to.
Well,
And so it's like, does this work with that? And so everybody just
Well,
kind of.
yeah, I asked a lot of questions because I just wanted to make sure, because it seems like, so O Court and then their GIS, what system is so old that they've been walking into getting an updated system, and I'm like, hold on here, you know, we've had a lot of conversations about supporting them with software. But taking a pause to make sure we're supporting them with the right software one time and not trying to get, you know, put the cart before the horse. As far as if there's changes going on from the AOC and from the court that's being driven on their system, that just making sure that we do this one time and it's the right way and it's not just what they think they need for the time, because I feel like there has just been a lot of moving parts back from the previous court administrator. So that was part of the pause too, in addition. That's a good point. Thank you Phil, for bringing that up.
That's where we're going.
This reminded me of a separate question about the municipal court. So a bit ago, we had a discussion about using our police officers to do security for the court, rather than needing to hire an outside security firm. How's that going?
We did, so we actually brought back a retired police officer to support them. And that was going really well, and just, I don't know, just say, just recently he's had some health issues and has been out, and so we have.
To rely on.
So we've had to, it's been a hybrid. It's been a true hybrid of, so the way that it was originally anticipated and I believe brought forward and discussed from the police department is not 100% how it's materialized. But this is back to, you have a plan and then it changes. So what we did, instead of, they thought that they would be able to just support and roll whoever was on to overtime to support them or on, and that just very quickly became the reality that was not going to be successful. And so they then hired a retired officer back to be that support officer, which has been very successful. And but that being said, it's one person, and then when there's any issue, we have to have the support professional services come in and support that. So it truly is a hybrid.
Okay, so to clarify, so there's the line item for security detail overtime for 76,000. And then later on, there's professional services security for 30. Is that going to the private security firm as needed?
Oh, that might be. Yeah, so yeah, the security and Loomis is our Loomis is so we don't,
They can get our cash.
yeah,
It's
the
safely away
cash
for us.
comes, yeah, there are cash transport.
That's a requirement. State.
Yeah, so they come and they pick up our cash for us, so we don't have to take it to a bank, deliver it to a bank.
Okay, and then the security detail overtime, is that what's the baby, is that our officers or is that the private firm?
So no, the security, if we're doing the overtime line, that is just our officers. So being our one officer basically that we hire to come back and support them. We don't typically have other officers at this point because the police department doesn't have enough staff to support that. So it's just the one officer that we brought back in that's supporting on that security detail, which probably the overtime needs to be removed at this point. It's just, that's one person's position.
Okay.
It's not really.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying.
And I think you might be raising another great point of if that is truly security in Loomis and the Laserfish was originally in the 23-24 in that line item, that we need to remove the description of Laserfish and then, like you previously stated, just label it more transparently. Which is easy to do.
This is why this department keeps doing that distinguished professional work.
Not if we keep spelling postage.
I like footage.
Do you want me to find out another typo?
Just keeps, like, if you find them, please send them to me.
Well,
Because
the header for the,
oh, the header's been fixed on all of them.
25.
I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
really?
We're just
Jeannie?
gonna relive
Yeah.
25 again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a song.
It is. Yeah, it's definitely. Yes.
Continuing in court world, so the public defender, we know that there's sort of this potential upcoming impact due to new regulations laws. We don't quite know how demanding that new impact will be.
Estimates are 3 to 4 times.
Should that be part of like a proviso or something? Because I don't think that's built into what we have in the current budget.
I wouldn't put it as.
I would go.
So I
we'd
think
look
it's
at it as
something
an
that,
adjustment.
I think, yeah, I think that'll be challenged even.
And
I don't know
who
how you
knows
challenge the
long it'll
Supreme
last or
Court,
whatever.
but yeah, there's public hearings coming up this month and next month on that. A lot of
Okay.
people weighing in, there's a lot of problems
It's
with
gonna be
that,
a ways
so,
Okay, so
yeah,
that is tackle it when it comes.
we're worried about it, but yeah.
Yeah.
Let's wait and see what,
It's
it
guys
could
not
be, it
falling
could be a
down.
phased implementation, who knows what they'll come up with, what they'll negotiate.
Unpredictable at this point
Yeah.
anyways.
Good question. Thank you. Colleagues, other questions, comments? We have a list of follow-ups here. And we'll do our darndest to get it. See, so next Thursday, just checking schedule while you're all ruminating on whether you have any other additional questions. Next Thursday, city council work session and then regular meeting. And if I recall correctly, the focus of the work session is not budget, it's
housing and intro to the comp plan.
there we go, thank you.
Little bit of budget, but at least we could bring the homework back.
Yeah.
Turn
Turn
out,
off, I just wanted to take people's time, so.
And I do just want to make note that I was asked to provide some reserve trends on Monday, and I just haven't had the opportunity to be able to complete that work. But I just want to also make note that that hasn't been forgotten about. It's been noted, and I will get that completed and bring it back.
I have a question. I'm kind of joking, but two of you have asked me this question. I'm not sure whether it has been. I haven't had a chance to ask you, Director Vaughn. if the revenues from traffic cameras, the new fund. Is interest allowed to, will it have to be used for the same purpose? Or will it something that can be used to backstop? Another a general fund or something else? Two of you asked me that question the other day, and I forgot to follow up. I apologize for that.
That question was asked and I don't currently have a solid answer. So that will be a
Works.
follow-up item too.
I guess it was that. Thank you, Director Bond. Councilor,
Our updated CIP, where was that? Do we have like a?
Did we include it? We
Is
didn't
it
include
in
it.
the back?
The list, there's a list.
There's a list.
it's
Yes, CIP list is on page 107.
very back.
Okay. Right,
There it
there we
is.
go. Okay.
And if you want the actual spreadsheet.
That might be
Erigo and I
the way that we're
presented
used
for
to seeing
25,
it.
26. Yeah, I can email
If
that
you
to
could
you.
send that around to council, then.
Yep.
I'm more familiar with that. 25, 26, we've got lakefront park development and construction demolition. We're not anticipating any. If we get funded, are we anticipating the lake park development construction would be done in the next biennium if we get the funding?
25, 26. I think it goes
Like
slightly into
27.
27. And because we've been told absolutely not on the 4 million. I know Amber and her team are working on a phasing plan.
Okay.
Actually, I had a conversation with Shelley Helder yesterday about this and our need to ask for dollars from the legislature next year. She wants a copy of that phasing plan once we have it, because that'll help with the narrative with our legislators. So, yeah. And she also liked the fact that we may get 2.5 million, that we've been asking everybody, and we've got our own funds in as well, so.
Yeah, cause I'm wondering if there's if we get any of that up and open, are there any other impacts to, security detail, extra? Is there anything that, maintenance that would be
Yeah,
needing to be increased if that gets operational in this biennium?
I think we've got some
I know we worry
dollars.
about-
Yeah, I mean, there will be some impacts to public works and,
Yeah.
PD does a beat over there anyway, because the park next door, Line Creek Preserve, so. Yeah, over time, we may see some costs escalate, but.
and on point about the funding stream, because we did not receive $4 million, this pushes back. Repaying ourselves potentially from certain grant opportunities for the Rose property. So, because we can't be eligible, we can't be.
No, we can go after the
Can we?
CFT funds, yeah.
Oh, we still can, okay, good, I thought we were. Still trying to use some of the get additional CFT funds, we got all the funds.
No, we're not gonna get any more CFT funds for down there.
Okay.
Yeah, we've pretty much got everything.
So we're not competing.
They're
against
still
ourselves.
limiting, that's why they only work through small portions of that property.
Okay.
Because they limit use
Okay.
and impervious surface, et cetera, so. No, we'll go after
Okay.
CFT funds
Wonderful,
for
thank you, I was worried about that.
75% max.
Okay. Councilman DeLeo.
When we look at the fixed capital assets, do we need to roll over the material bills into next year? Because that's when it's likely to get paid for.
Yeah, I mean, that will have to be before, because you'll be seeing the contract this month, but yeah, they're not gonna start till February.
Right, so we want it to show up on the budget.
Okay.
And then are we gonna crack a bottle of champagne on it as though?
Yeah, tie a rope and swing, yeah.
Yeah, we never did that with the tennis court lighting.
That's because that wasn't. I talked to Frank about that. It wasn't, exactly what we'd hoped it would be, so it didn't deserve a bottle, but this will deserve a bottle.
Yeah.
Or two.
I was gonna say, for each person, just kidding.
Colleagues, other questions? More opportunities.
Just clarification question, again, on page 107, 37th Avenue sidewalk Brookside Elementary. I'm assuming design is part of that same.
Yes,
And it's 400, and then there's just design. Are we just gonna get really creative?
no, it's just hiding.
It's hiding, okay, but that would be
You
the
can go
other,
box over it.
It's probably the other, is there,
the Lake Forest.
There was a Brookside, design
And a Lake Forest
and a
Park
Lake Forest Park
Elementary.
design.
Elementary.
Early action, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something dropped off there.
And I think that was in your, I think there was a proviso of like 5 different things. I think those 2 might have been on it, things we can't get
Yes.
to.
Yes.
So those are 2 would be part of the
Those,
proviso, okay,
those are,
current thing.
those are, dependent on the new funding. That's the 002 fund.
Yeah,
Like, you'll
Okay.
see those in there as well, whatever page that was.
Oh, we're at 7:20. We have a few more minutes if you would like to ask any additional questions, or we can take the list of homework with us. If you, as always, if you think of anything else, just please reach out. And we can certainly accommodate.
the roundabout, it's in this biennium.
Yes.
When is the significant construction?
Next year.
Intended to start next year?
Next year, it would go to bid in January. So we're waiting for TIB staff to take it before their board in November. Asking for authorization up to $1 million. They said they could get, see what happens with the board. We need between 600,000 and 700,000. But we'd like the authority up to $1 million in case there are cost escalations, because that's what we are eligible for. But that would be the last piece of funding. If we don't get that, you do have another revenue source we can talk about that could pay for it. The 002 fund.
Is there a way to get more information about, maybe it's just because I haven't looked at this enough, on the general fund expenditures, because it is the area that we are sharing, we've always talked about as the hardest hardship with regard to sustainable funds. And as I looked at it correctly, in our 23-24, we estimated that our any fund balance would be about $5.5 million for the general. But we're projecting that we're gonna go in with over $9 million with our fund balance for the general. And that with the $3 million, we're essentially where we thought we would be last year. But done the math right. We had been suggesting that we were going to have a fund balance problem going forward, which doesn't appear to be, even with the $3 million dips, general fund balance. Our reserves at the end of the 25-26, where we thought we'd be at the end of.
That's the work that Lindsay was gonna do, because we need to pull out the ARPA funds that are overstating the ending fund balance. Because we rolled all that in there.
Because is there a way to see where those general fund monies actually go for each of the programs? And see what the trend has been. And then it gets overstated because of the new 002. That when you look at the general fund projected balance, what we're hiding is we sometimes think of the general fund as being, we can spend it on anything. But it will be commingled with 002, which is now going to be a restricted general
Yes.
fund. And
Right.
so it will cover up the structural deficit with the general fund. Because there are only certain things that the 002 can be spent on, and therefore there are other fund sources, or I should say, there are other expenses that can only be paid from the general fund.
So what you're saying is that we'll have the most awesome sidewalks in the world, but no people to basically keep them maintained. That's.
Well, actually, what I'm saying is it's very hard to see.
So you're on point. So the consolidated, what is, just to bring everybody,
Page 24.
to bring everybody along, I was gonna say, to bring page 24.
I'd look at page 40.
So consolidated funds, that's exactly where I was gonna go. So that what he's stating is the consolidated fund structure. If you go back to page 14 from the chart, everything that's a circle that's rolling up into that general fund, that's what's displaying on the consolidated financial schedule, which is not a true story. That's why we created the 002 fund separately to keep it to keep it completely separate. The challenge that we are going to have going forward is exactly what Budget Chair Lebo is saying, is that we've got this traffic safety fund that is very restricted, but it technically has a general fund number. So when we submit our annual financial reports and whatnot, it's going to show, it's going to drive that up, which is not a true statement. It's because it,
Where page 41 comes in, where you have it separate, and you're
Okay.
showing the ending fund balance within that.
yes,
So it doesn't roll up, like in the consolidated.
yes.
And you could set the minimum fund balance in there as well,
It's just thinking,
correct?
Yes,
I was
we
just
could,
wondering why it wasn't, because
Or 002.
Yeah,
sure.
we could,
it's technically in the general. It technically falls under a policy because it's in the general.
because council contingency is part of the general fund. It rolls up, I mean, so.
yeah, but that council contingency, so if you guys wanted to spend 1 cent out of that council contingency fund, you would have to adopt an ordinance directing to spend 1 cent out of that fund. So when you create a council contingency fund, it's very restricted in the sense of money goes in, but to get it out, it's gonna make everybody say, yes, we want it to go out.
I'd like to see that any of these funds, if they're restricted, to just put an R in it, so it's like a cue me that it's restricted.
Fund to-
Well,
It's
But-
good,
It's like
yes,
general fund. is
Or-
one, not.
Oh,
Yeah, everything
yes.
else is.
everything is,
okay.
Yeah,
yeah, so,
That's why the 002 needs to be reflected. Unlike the 001, which you can pretty much spend anywhere. Not exactly, but generally. The 002 is going to be significantly restricted.
which is why we elected to create its own fund. like,
Which I think is a
just
great idea,
Because we keep,
because of the restrictions.
and because of the lack of restriction, we'll just be clear on the true general fund. So it didn't, yeah,
But the point I want to make too, though, is on page 41. When the public looks, this is the document they'll look at. The 001 will not be overstated in projected ending fund balance due to 002 because we've made it its own fund.
So the policy, and I may be nitpicking here, but the policy for fund balances and reserves. Operating funds of the city have a minimum fund balance target for the general fund. 60 days operating expense, 115. Page 115. 60 days operating expense or 16% of the total estimated current year revenue, minus one-time revenue. It just says general fund, which if there's things that are rolled under the general fund, it kind of feels like it should be. I mean, if we want to look at that, and get it more specific as just 001 or something like that. I mean, we get to make the policy, so.
I think, yeah, it's just referring to the general fund 001 within the scheduled fund balances, not the rolled up within the consolidated.
But there's no way, you don't even, someone could read it either way. At this point.
the way that it's been handled, treated from myself and the previous finance director was general fund. What was being referred to within this policy was just 001. That being stated, now it might be time to clarify it. I'm hearing the concern.
Yeah. We've outgrown that language, I think.
Well, it's because of the new 002.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise it would still be fine.
The one thing constant is change.
So this is comprehensive financial management policy, so that's something budget finance would
Take a look at.
tweak and then make a recommendation to council for adoption.
Just to add the clarity to it.
So when we're running low of things to do in December,
I was thinking January.
Oh,
January sounds
Like
long.
January.
Election for assessor for Tony on chaos theory.
No way, not touching that.
I do say that one thing that would be nice, is not just a yes, but a yes, and what is that number? So we know how far above it we are. So how much buffer we have from our ending balance to that reserve number.
you're referring back to
That
page
page
41.
Yeah, 16.
Yeah.
What's the 16% look like?
Yeah,
Or higher?
I mean, it really, like, I think I mentioned to you, it tells the story for, I think it's the street
So-
fund.
So just so everybody knows that even though we adopt a biennial budget, your reserves are always only calculated on an annual. So that 16% is you take, and the way that our reserve policy is written is you take the revenue number, which is different than, in fact, I had to check this because when I first came here, because I had never witnessed a policy that was based off of a reserve or the revenue
yeah.
versus the expenditure. Normally, it's the expenditures that you base your 16% off of. And so, but it can go either way. And so but the way that the city of Lake Forest Park has written the policy is the revenues and 16% off the revenues.
But the chair we showed made a very compelling case for the revenue side of things.
Following up on this, so on page 115. General street sewer surface water are 16%, and it says all others are 8%. But when I go to the table on page 41, there's only 4 funds that have yeses on them, and those are the 4 16ths. So what are the 8% operating funds?
We can add that.
Some clarity would be helpful.
What page did you say? I'm sorry, one?
40.
115,
41.
yeah, 115
Okay.
has like a catch-all 8%, but I don't see anything on page 41 that is a that would be in the catch-all.
Just reading the footnote here. We can certainly revisit this for clarity, try to get some.
Yeah, part of what I'm interested in is trying to understand the trend of how the revenue for the general fund for the past biennium. This biennium relate poorly because. My recollection for the last one was that we took about 978,000 of the ARPA funds to balance the general.
Can we see,
So this year, we're looking at $3 million to essentially balance the. Well, next biennium is at $4.5 million. I. If that translate to our reserves, because if our balance at the end of the biennium is $6 million. We don't resolve the structural deficit issue, that means all the lower reserves. So I'm interested in understanding where there's how we're spending our general fund, which is not entirely clear.
there were some great graphs. I think it was the one with the 6-year where the 6-year planning graph where it was the 2 lines and they crossed and then we were in trouble.
Showing the structural deficit.
Sure, yeah, it would
Structural
be,
problem, I should say.
it would be nice to see something similar, but with, revenue and then one-time revenue, 2 different lines. And then what our reserve is, so you can see how those, you know, where those things are merging, maybe start from what's happened in 23, 24, and then what we're looking at 25, 26. I don't know if there's any way to predict beyond X one-time funds, you never know what you're gonna get. But I think that will help us understand, you know, the safety net that we get from one-time funds is still continuing.
And these one-time funds that we're ending this year with are just, a lot of it's just salary savings because we haven't been able to fill positions and work
The
hasn't
loss.
gotten done.
Yeah, the ARPA lost revenue, the
That's revenue.
salary savings, which I'm
Never
careful
protects.
asking your department heads about that.
Mhm.
Cause that has hurt in a whole different way. And so it just, and I know every department has felt that. So that's a challenge, but definitely something that it has, I guess, you know, and then the other thing is, when people leave or they retire, I define that as a buyout. So when they leave, we have vacation balances, and then it's basically called our compensated absences. So then you buy, and I will, so then there's just a bucket of money that you're essentially paying employees that separate with you, whether it's through retirement, leaving by choice, whatever, however it goes about. And so that's another piece of the equation that can skew things. And so it's not just as simple as being straightforward. And what did Shannon say? She has hired 21 positions since in this last biennium, which is just,
Yeah, and
if you
another,
think about that in itself.
yeah, another one-time funds is when we terminated the contract with Kenworth. It
Oh,
turned
yeah,
out when we
that
did
was-
the reconciliation, they owed us money. You'd never known that until you terminated that contract. And so
That's
I
true.
think it's gonna be very hard to project one-time funds.
But we can
But-
at least project ongoing funds.
Oh, yeah, we can definitely, and we do that with the 6-year
Yeah.
financial forecast. I mean, there's a projection of revenues coming in. You can see in the budget, the percentages that we've allocated, they've been pretty steady over time.
So just seeing that,
Come back to Councilor Zerlino, at least moving patient.
So it would be nice for me to understand where we spend the general fund monies. And what we projected and how we spent it in the last biennium. Recognizing that when you project it and you end up with retirements or other positions for whatever reason, you can have a false savings. In essence, that you had projected to spend, and had that person not retired, you would have spent the money, but
Mhm.
because you didn't spend the money, it actually goes into your fund balance at the end of the year.
Yes,
And
same
so.
with expenditures, same with
So I'm interested to see how we spent it, projected, and what we spent in the last biennium, what we're projecting to spend in this coming biennium, because from this proposal, we have a problem. So I'm trying to see, other than just it's $3 million, because if we don't get a levy increase through taxpayers, community, something has to change. Trying to understand what those levers are. And then the other one is, and maybe again, it's just because I've read this in enough detail, what's special revenue?
24
And on the consolidated. So we have
special revenue funds are the street fund and the transportation benefit district fund. And that's on actually page 14, the fund structure. Those are our only two special revenue funds.
so those are the headers that you're seeing on consolidated.
So what page?
So 101 and 104, that represent what is on page 24 especially.
Yeah, is it page 24? Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's all David.
That is correct.
That's 101 and 1.
Yes.
Any other questions? Just a quick. Dr. Bond?
It's gonna I was just gonna make a comment that page 14 is, I refer back to this often. This is one of my favorites.
It's excellent.
It's a good visual.
It is. Mr. McLean sent out the budget schedule. Okay, just make sure everybody has that on their radar, please. There are a lot of meetings coming up, and Deputy Mayor Bogey has been working with Director Hoffman on schedule for the comprehensive plan, trying to figure out what is necessary there. So I'm just taking a look at the bottom here. Again, what's listed here. But we don't have this on the agenda, but I just reading this at the end here, just stay tuned, make sure that you're cognizant that things are make pivot a little bit here, but the meetings that foreseeable near future are set. Okay, since it's a special meeting, we can't do anything. for the good of the
Could I
order.
add to that, Mr. Mayor, please?
Yes.
I just want to say that it could be that we won't need all the meetings that we have here and that we could get done earlier in December rather than later. But that assumes that all of you read the sections we're going to discuss ahead of time and make an effort to provide your suggestions or comments or questions by Wednesday morning before, or by 2 days before, sorry, by 2 days before the meeting. That way, I think we'll be able to move through pretty quickly. There's a lot of excellent work done here. And so I don't think it will bog down, but based on past experience, there are always some places here and there where things bog down and take more time. So thank you for your patience with all these few extra meetings and for your homework assignments.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bodie. Okay. I guess we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Bye, Lori. Have a great evening.